Dear friends, patients and colleagues, very welcome to our 11th Swiss Biohealth News today on Monday. I think we've got amazing and very interesting news and great interview partner with Professor Michael Holick, the one who identified the vitamin D3 hormone and the storage form, the so-called Calcidiol. This week, tomorrow, we are going to have an interview in German with Professor Frohböse from University of Cologne. He's very famous, or he has been a very famous athlete, and he's going to talk about nutrition, performance, intermittent fasting, things like that. So it will be very interesting. On Wednesday, again in both languages, German and English, our guest will be Professor Yehuda Schönfeld from Tel Aviv University. He's a renowned immunologist. I met him several years ago in London, and I think this will be a very, very interesting interview as well. Thursday, we are going to talk with Marco Gadola, the former CEO of Straumann. He was voted second as the most influential persons in dental industry. So I think especially for us implantologists, it will be very interesting to get some information and some input from Marco Gadola. Friday, Professor Birkmeyer from Vienna, his father kind of identified the Parkinson's disease and developed some treatment options. And he himself is discovered the therapeutic effect of NADH, the so-called coenzyme 1. On Saturday, we are going to stream the interview with Kurt Mossetter, the former national US soccer team doctor. Again, I would like to call for action. Please register at our website d3-study.org to receive further information, a questionnaire about your intake of vitamin D3, maybe your D3 level in case you have tested. And as well, I would like to tell you that today we started a new project with University of Frankfurt. Professor Ganati. It's the Department of Maxillofacial and Plastic Surgery and the Department of Neurology, the Department of Cardiovascular Disease. And we're going to start a prospective study with vitamin D3 on 150 patients. So that will be very, very interesting. So last Friday we had as an interview partner Dirk Freiland, Ironman finisher, who finished in the age of 50 with the amazing time of a little bit more than 10 hours, the World Championship on Hawaii, the so-called Ironman. And he was talking about how he prepared himself, and one was the technique of Wim Hof, the so-called Iceman. And so we Googled on PubMed the study about his let's say technique, breathing technique and the cold exposure. And so normally we would believe, or we believed for decades, that you could not control the innate immune system, and as well you could not control the autonomous nervous system. And so that's what the study was about. They had a control group and 12 participants. They prepared themselves by meditation technique, by breathing technique, and by exposure to cold. And that's a quick movie that shows how they exposed themselves to cold by lying in the snow or being barefoot. And before and after they went into a sauna somewhere completely in cold water, and others they were hiking in up to minus 20 Celsius just with a short. And Then they were kind of vaccinated with endotoxins of Escherichia coli. And so the interesting thing was that the experimental group, they had an increase of the release of adrenaline, and as well they had an absorption of the pro-inflammatory cytokines, and we dentists, we know those very well because especially TNF-alpha, interleukin 6, we see, for example, expressed by root canals, and as well the interleukin 8. And but the anti-inflammatory production of interleukin 10 was increased. So interleukin 10 is kind of the brake of the immune system, and in contrary to the interferon gamma, what is kind of the gas pedal of the immune system. So this was very, very interesting because it showed that they could even regulate and control the heartbeat, things like that. So it made me very interested into this technique, and I downloaded the free app Wim Hof method, and I started on the weekend. I had some time and I started the breathing technique, and it's quite easy. You inhale for 30 times very deeply in your stomach, your chest, and even your brain. And then you exhale. So it's a kind of hyperventilation, and then you hold the breath for about as long as you could without forcing yourself too much. So I was very surprised that it was quite easy to hold it for 2 minutes right at the beginning, and then you inhale, you hold it for 15 seconds, and you repeat the procedure. Then I went into an ice bath 2 times. It was just the cold water from the Lake of Constance. It was about 8 to 9 degrees Celsius, but it's already very, very cold. And the interesting thing was that, like I do since 5 years, I measured my heart rate variability, the HRV, in the morning, and it was regeneration was 76%. Stress was 34%, what is not so bad after a very, very tough week. And that was before, and then I applied the breathing technique and the ice bath, and within 30 minutes I improved to 104% of regeneration, and I reduced the stress down to 5%. So actually I'm working now for many years to improve my values, and this was quite surprising that it could be so easy, and it costs nothing. You do not need any tool, you follow this method. So this was for me a great insight, because at the end we want to have a great regeneration every single morning, and very, very low stress, because then the bioage goes down. And we know that there is just one disease, and that's aging, according to the to Professor Sinclair, and so that makes totally sense to for longevity. As well, we provided some of the studies. Professor Cheng, last week we talked to Professor Cheng, I think it was on Thursday, about his high-dose vitamin C therapy, and he had amazing successes in Shanghai. He was even his treatment protocol is recommended by the Shanghai government, and he talked about 3 studies. So he sent us the links, and we prepared for you. So this is a meta-analysis, and it shows that let's say a 75 kilogram person would take 15 grams of vitamin C, and it shortened the stay in intensive care. It shortened the duration of the mechanical ventilation, and due to the reduction of the lung damage and oxidative stress, what is caused by hypoxia. So this is a very interesting, very important study actually. And the next study he talked about was this study where they performed a study on 1,444 soldiers, and all of them, they thought they would receive 6 grams of vitamin C per day orally, every hour 1 gram, but about 50% they received the placebo, so there was nothing in. And the interesting thing is that the vitamin C group had a 20% lower risk of getting a cold than the placebo group. So I would say that's very significant, and especially in the group among the non-smokers, it was the effect was even stronger. So because it's not so easily absorbed in smokers, we know that smokers, just 1 cigarette is absorbing about or wearing off about 1,000 milligrams, that's 1 gram of vitamin C. The last study is this one, where they observed 252 students, and 47 of those had a flu-like symptoms, and or the 47 out of the 252, they received a so-called mega dose. What is 6 grams, 1 gram per hour on the first day, and then every single day just 3 grams. The control group was about 2 times more, 20%. They received a pain reliever and decongestants, and at the same time 3 grams of vitamin C per day. So the difference was that the first group, they received no pain relievers and decongestants at all, but a mega dose is 6 grams on the first day, and the control group, the pain relievers and so on, and just 3 grams per day. And the interesting thing is the result that the group with the mega doses, 6 grams on the first day, had a decrease of 85% of the flu and cold symptoms. So that would mean as soon as you would feel something, go up to a mega doses of 6 grams. Orally, if infusion is not available at the moment. So that's definitely a very good idea. So next, let's have a quick look at the pandemic updates. The more green, the more orange it turns. The left one is from last Friday, the right one from this morning at 11:30. And we see more and more turns into orange. So it's improving step by step. And we want to rely on numbers to follow the hysteria going all around the world. And if we have a look at the so-called doubling rate, that means how many days it takes to double the number of cases. And we see, if we go back 9 days in Italy, the blue line, it was about 5 days it took to double the numbers of cases. So today it takes about 10 days to double, even more than 10 days to double the number of cases. So no matter what they tell you in television, it's improving, and I believe in about 2 weeks, like I already said some time ago, we will be in the green zone with Italy and with Switzerland. We see Switzerland is performing very well in the past days. Germany is improving again. They had a little bit not so good performance at the beginning of the weekend, and as well France is improving, and we see US, what is some weeks behind, is doing a quite good job, and I think very soon it will be up to 5, 8, 11 as well. So it goes all in the good direction, and always we have to take in mind that correlation does not equal causality. So correlation would mean, for example, or the question is if those patients are dying because of COVID-19 or they are dying with COVID-19. So for example, if you would say a patient who died and you would check which of those have been drinking milk during the life, you would see there is maybe 100% of correlation between the death and drinking milk, but you would never get the idea that drinking milk would have caused the death. So that's not causality. So we have to have a look at the causality. And I think the most interesting number will be, and there are already some published, and it shows exactly what I believed, that if you compare the overall number of deaths from the 1st of January to the 30th of March, it's not more death in general than the years before. Because some patients who died of chronic disease, they have been now labeled as COVID-19 patients, but we have to have a look at the overall deaths of the patients. So our today partner or guest for the interview is Professor Holick from Boston University School of Medicine. He published over 400 books, papers, and studies, and he developed the so-called D-Minder. Very nice app. I like it very much, and I use it since 3 or 4 years. And I screenshotted the app today at around 1:30 p.m. and you could see the solar noon is 46 degrees. So at the moment it goes up to 46 degrees at 1:27. At the moment when I screenshotted, it was 44 degrees, and you're going to build vitamin D3 between 30 degrees and more. So we could see between 10:18 and 4:37. And at this moment, what was around noon, we could see that they were still available for another 4 hours. And the device is even kind of estimating my vitamin D3 level, so what is supposed to be around 125 nanograms per milliliter. So if you push the button, start sun exposure, and you sit into the sun, the D-Minder is even going to give you a warning signal after a while, so you would not getting sunburn. So amazing app, and I could recommend. I use it for some time to make it to make it easier to spend time in the sun, and as well safer. And we are going to ask Professor Holick if he believes that the natural vitamin D3 is even better than the one we could take from supplements. So now let's say hello and talk to our guest, Professor Holick from Boston. Yes, hello and welcome to our Swiss Biohealth News. Professor Holick from the US. We are very happy and very pleased to have you here. So we met each other 2 years ago for a vitamin D Congress in Frankfurt. And first of all, I would like to know if there are any new insights since then regarding your work. Is there something breaking news in vitamin D?
So there are really, at least in my opinion, 3 pieces of new information over the past 2 years, right? The first is that what is really intriguing to me is a study that looked at endothelial membrane stability. And even though it's an in vitro study, right? Mm-hmm. But as you know, the endothelial cells play a very critical role in maintaining good cardiovascular health and good immune health. And so a study was done to ask the question, what chemical compound would stabilize endothelial membranes? And if they could do that, that would therefore improve immune function and cardiovascular health. And after screening thousands of compounds, the compound that this group came up with was vitamin D3, not 25-hydroxyvitamin D3, not 1,25-dihydroxyvitamin D3, but vitamin D3 itself. We think that that's very important. We've always wondered about this issue of being exposed to sunlight, maintaining vitamin D levels versus taking these large doses of vitamin D periodically. And is there going to be any difference to your overall health? That study implies that maintaining an adequate blood level of vitamin D, separate from 25-hydroxyvitamin D, may play a very important role in immune function and endothelial cell stability.
Okay, so you said there would be three new
Well,
insights.
the second one
Yeah.
is a study out of California. And again, it's a study that just has interesting implications. We know, and the study showed roundworms that were treated with vitamin D lived longer. Now, it
Mm-hmm.
turns out that the reason that we, as we age, or roundworms as they age, you wind up cross-linking proteins, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the cross-linking of proteins is a process of aging. Well, for
Mm-hmm.
worms, it's a problem because if you cross-link their proteins, they can't move, they can't eat, and therefore they die. And
Mm-hmm.
so a study was done, and they gave just vitamin D3 to roundworms and showed that they lived much longer. And when they
Mm-hmm.
looked at gene expression, they showed
Mm-hmm.
that the gene that was being regulated was related to cross-linking of proteins. It prevented the cross-linking of proteins and therefore presumably could increase longevity.
I was studying a lot about the findings of David Sinclair from Harvard. So, and he's stating that there's just one chronic disease, and this disease is called aging. Do you believe in that?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Um, has it as well maybe something to do with the sirtuins and maybe with other things like that the vitamin D3 could interact in this part of aging?
Yes, it could potentially.
Okay, okay, that's very interesting. So because that is something we are working on the moment to better understand aging and to address aging, because if we could solve this problem, it would solve a lot of other things at the same time.
Amen.
Mm-hmm.
The third observation is one that we've made that you're probably aware. Several years ago, we had reported in PLOS 1 that if you give healthy adults for 3 months 2,000 units of vitamin D a day, and you
Mm-hmm.
get the white blood cells at the baseline and 3 months later, and look at gene expression analysis, that we showed about 291 genes were being up and down regulated, helping
Mm-hmm.
to regulate your immune system. Well, we have now followed up with a much longer study where we
Mm-hmm.
gave healthy adults either 600, 4,000, or 10,000 units a day for 24 weeks, so half a year.
Mm-hmm.
And we looked at their calcium metabolism because we wanted to know, if you continue to increase your vitamin D intake, do you continue to have an influence on calcium metabolism?
Mm-hmm.
Or could you dissociate vitamin D's non-calcemic effects from its calcemic effects?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we looked at parathyroid hormone levels, serum calcium levels, serum 25-hydroxy vitamin D levels, and we obtained white blood cells at the beginning and at the end of the study. And we
Mm-hmm.
did expression analysis. And we
Mm-hmm.
showed that on 600 units a day, there was basically no effect on parathyroid hormone and calcium metabolism.
Mm-hmm.
These individuals, by the way, were vitamin D deficient or insufficient. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's important to note because, as you're probably aware, a lot of these studies that have recently come out, including the VITAL study and the D2D study for diabetes, I mean, most of these individuals were vitamin D sufficient to begin with. So
Mm-hmm.
giving vitamin D and thinking you're going to see a biologic effect, to me, I think is questionable at best.
Mm-hmm.
So what we showed was at 4,000 units a day, the PTH levels plateaued very nicely, just as expected.
Mm-hmm.
On 10,000 units a day, the PTH levels also plateaued but didn't change.
Mm-hmm.
Now we looked at gene expression, and there were three interesting observations. The first is, if you put somebody that's deficient or insufficient on 600 units a day, you can
Mm-hmm.
up and down regulate about 150 of their genes in their immune system. If you put them on 4,000 units a day, you get about 300 to 500 genes being regulated. But on 10,000 units a day, about 1,500 genes were up or down regulated. Right? So what we think we've done is to dissociate the calcemic effect of vitamin D, right? On 4,000 units a day is probably maximum benefit, but to get additional benefit potentially in your immune system and throughout your body, on 10,000 units a day, we saw a much more marked effect. And the blood levels of 25-hydroxy vitamin D were consistent. 25-hydroxy vitamin D levels on 600 didn't change. 4,000 went up to about 30 to 40 nanograms per ml. But on 10,000, most of the individuals had a blood level of about 60 to 90 nanograms per ml. No one had hypercalcemia. No one demonstrated any toxicity.
So that's really amazing news, and shows that because we are recommending our patients before surgery. We do huge surgeries, oral surgeries, and 4 weeks before, prior to the surgery, to 4 weeks after, we are recommending about 20,000 units per day. But in general, we would recommend about 10,000. To be honest, I take a lot more sometimes. And so, in your opinion, is there something like, so many people are talking about toxicity of vitamin D3. So have you seen any toxic effect in vitamin D3, and which level which amount you have to take to see a toxicity?
Right. So before I answer that question, I want to give you one more piece of information about that study that I just did mention.
Yeah.
And that is that we had if you look at that publication, which I would encourage you to do, if you look at, that these, what are called heat maps, that the genes that are blue are underexpressed and genes that are red are expressed or overexpressed. If you look at if 30 to 40% of the individuals that raise their blood levels to the same degree of about 80 nanograms per ml had much less change in the expression of those genes, showing very clearly that there is individual responses even if you have the same blood level, right? And so that can help maybe also explain a lot of the confusion in literature, because even if you raise the blood level, there are some people, for whatever reason that we don't understand yet, don't respond as well. They did have some response, but not the robust response that we've seen in others. Now, regarding toxicity, vitamin D intoxication is one of the rarest medical conditions in the world. And you're probably aware that before 1950, even Europe had fortified food with vitamin D. And so in England, for example, custard, milk, all kinds of products were fortified with vitamin D. And then in the early 1950s, there was an outbreak of hypercalcemia in infants. They had funny looking faces, and they had supravalvular aortic stenosis. They have a heart problem. So back in the early 50s, this happened in the UK, is that the House of Commons health group brought in the experts, and they were clueless as to what the cause was. So they reviewed the literature, and they found that if you give pregnant rats high doses of vitamin D, that they have hypercalcemia, of course, supravalvular aortic stenosis, and funny looking faces. So they concluded that this observation must be related to what was seen in these infants. These infants also had mild mental retardation. So that caused great consternation in the UK. So immediately, laws were passed in the UK forbidding the fortification of anything with vitamin D because they thought that this outbreak of hypercalcemia in these infants was due to overfortification of milk with vitamin D. They had no evidence for this. That law then went throughout Europe and throughout Asia and throughout South America. So even today, most European countries forbid, right, fortification of foods, right? Asia, same thing, and in South America. And most countries, right, require that you have a prescription or some doctor's note to be able to buy vitamin D, all for that reason. But what was the cause? The most likely cause was these children had Williams syndrome, right? Williams syndrome is a genetic disorder that causes elephantiasis and mild mental retardation, supravalvular aortic stenosis, and what's amazing, they have a hypersensitivity to vitamin D that can cause hypercalcemia. I've discussed this with a lot of the health officials in England, for example, with the House of Commons, and elsewhere in Brazil. I met with their health group. And even though everybody agrees that most likely that's the cause, no one has yet made the effort to change the laws. Happily, India, right, more than 50% of Indian population in India is vitamin D deficient. They've now done something about it. They now fortify milk and cooking oil with vitamin D2.
Have you got an idea what could have been the cause between the Williams syndrome so what was the...
Sorry, I'm talking too fast. So Williams syndrome causes elephantiasis. So funny looking faces. Causes a heart problem, supravalvular aortic stenosis, right? And if you give them vitamin D, they have hypersensitivity. So they develop hypercalcemia, right?
Yes, but why we had so many infants with...
So many. It was only a couple dozen children.
Ah, okay. So it was a correlation, but not a causality, something like this.
That's right.
Okay.
There were a couple of children that did have deintoxication because they were getting huge amounts of cod liver oil and all kinds of other stuff. But no, these kids likely had Williams syndrome, right? Because it makes no sense, right? Even for an infant to become intoxicated, you're not going to wind up with funny looking faces. So they would have said that that happened during pregnancy. A couple of more comments about vitamin D intoxication. Because even here in the United States, I have problems with my primary care physician colleagues because a patient will come in with a blood level of, say, 80 to 100 nanograms per ml, right, which is 250 nanomoles per liter. And they'll say, oh, my heavens, this is vitamin D toxicity. But vitamin D intoxication, you have to have hypercalcemia, right? And often at least a normal or high serum phosphate. And 25 hydroxy vitamin D typically is over 200 nanograms per ml. Okay. And even the Endocrine Society practice guidelines, right? I chaired that committee. We had recommended you don't see vitamin D intoxication until you're well over 150 to 200 nanograms per ml. Okay.
So I read in your work that you some time ago you recommended 400 to 2,000, something like this, international units. So is there, in the meantime, now in 2020, what is the amount you would recommend, the value, the international units you would recommend in general, and especially in times like the pandemic we are facing now at the moment? And is it, as I understood, that we should take it on a daily basis, because from nature it was not mean that we would have half a year of no sun, because humanity was born in or started in Africa, where we had every single day, 365 days a year, enough sun. And so, because the half-life, as I understood, of the serum calcidiol is quite short, I think just 1 day, something like this. So what are your recommendations in general and especially facing coronavirus?
So I have a couple of suggestions. So the first is based on the endocrine practice guidelines and my own experience. My recommendation, infants should be on at least 600, preferably 1,000 units a day during first year of life. Children, in my opinion, should be on minimum 600 as recommended by the endocrine practice guidelines. Up to 1,000 is perfectly safe. So I recommend for all parents with children 1,000 units a day. However, teenagers, I think, should be treated like adults. And that means that they should be on minimum 2,000 units a day. We showed a couple of years ago that healthy adults and teenagers that got 1,000 units a day, essentially none of them can raise their blood level above that 30 nanogram per ml range where we want everybody to be. But preferably, I personally take 6,000 units of vitamin D a day. And there's a very good study out of Canada showing up to 10 to 20,000 units a day is perfectly safe, especially if you're obese. Because if you're obese, you need 2 to 3 times more vitamin D.
Okay. And of course, we should take it every single day, not just once a week.
So it's a catch-22, right? And that is that especially for my elder patients, right, I recommend that they take 50,000 units every 2 weeks for good compliance, right? But for those that really want to maximize their health and get the full benefit of vitamin D, you're correct. I think everybody should be taking it on a daily basis.
And what would you say is the target value in nanograms? Should we between 40 and 60 or maybe even higher?
Right. So my level's around 72 on 6,000 units a day, which is totally predictable, right? We know that if you're at a level of 20, for every 100 units you ingest, you raise your blood level by 0.6 to 1 nanogram per ml. And then it begins to plateau. So people think that if you're on, say, 10,000 units a day, that you're going to continue to go up like this. No. What happens is that you go up and then you maintain that blood level at around 60 to 80 nanograms per ml. And so the Endocrine Society recommends preferred range 40 to 60, but certainly up to 100 is perfectly safe. And there's no evidence one way or the other whether 60 versus 80 makes any difference. And as I had mentioned to you before, from our study on 10,000 units a day, some people had a much more robust response on their gene expression compared to others.
Michael, I'm using your the D-Minder, the app you have developed. I love it.
Good.
And just I realized 2 days ago in Zurich, there's now the angle is above 45 degrees. So, I mean, it's starting already, I think, around 32, 34, but they say about 45 is a really nice intake of vitamin D3. So, is there a big difference between vitamin D3 we are taking by supplements, or is the real thing in the sun still the better we could get it into our system?
So just to show you, I practice what I preach. You can see that's my backyard. Okay.
Yeah.
And so I think that sun exposure has additional benefits to your immune system, even above and beyond making vitamin D.
Yeah.
However, remember that we, throughout evolution, had gained all of our vitamin D from sun exposure. And we also know from a study that was done in Africa that Hasda and Maasai herders, their blood levels of 25-hydroxy vitamin D are about 40 to 60 nanograms per ml.
Yeah, right? I know this study.
And so when you make vitamin D in your skin, you don't instantly make vitamin D, as you know, right? You make pre-vitamin D, and it thermally isomerizes the vitamin D over a period of several hours. It's made in your epidermis, which is a bloodless tissue. The vitamin D has to therefore transit out of the epidermis into the dermal capillary bed. That all takes time. Now, why is that important? Because what the body is doing very nicely for you, even after a single exposure to sunlight, maintaining your blood level of vitamin D for several days. And we showed that, right? Because we asked the question many years ago, is there any difference of vitamin D taking it as a supplement and sunlight? And we showed that you're right, that if you take it as an oral, it goes up and is back down within 24 to 48 hours. But if you're exposed to simulated sunlight in our tanning bed, the blood level went up and stayed up for several days.
Oh, very interesting.
So when you make vitamin D in your skin, it lasts 2 to 3 times longer in your body than it does when you take it as a supplement.
Michael, as I understood, if we spend, let's say, with 45 degrees, so during lunchtime, in 1 hour we could build up even 10,000 units. Is that correct or totally wrong?
So it's totally wrong. And the reason is that because I've been interviewed by the press for 30 years about this, and what they care about is just getting a simple message. But as you've learned from the D-Minder, so DMINDERINFO, right? It's free on your Android and Apple, right? It will tell you anywhere on this planet when you can make vitamin D, how much vitamin D you make, and when to get out of the sun so you don't get a sunburn, right? So the problem is area of exposure, right? So if you are wearing a bathing suit and you're exposed to what's called a minimal erythemal dose of sunlight, so a light pinkness to your skin 24 hours later, it's equivalent to ingesting 15,000 to 20,000 units of vitamin D. But I'm sure even where you are right now, it's not warm enough for you to be out in a bathing suit exposed to sunlight, right?
Okay.
So realistically, you have to look at area of exposure.
Okay, so the more exposure, the better.
Exactly, and remember,
so the more skin you expose.
Number one. And number two is our study showed in a tanning bed. So we had the entire body exposed, right? So when you're out in the sun, you're only exposing part of your body. You're not getting a 360 degree, right? So realistically, I tell people if you're wearing a short sleeve shirt and short pants and exposed to sunlight for the period of time on the D-Minder, you're probably making an equivalent of about maybe 3,000 to 5,000 units.
I remember when I attended speech of Professor Schönfeld from Tel Aviv, he said he would rather allow his kids smoking than avoiding the sun. So, so this is, so I mean, what about sun, skin cancer, sunscreen and those things? What is your opinion on that?
Sure. So if you put a sunscreen on with an SPF of 30 properly, it absorbs 97.5% of the ultraviolet B radiation that would enter into your skin. Therefore, it reduces your ability to make vitamin D in your skin by 97.5%. Okay. And so thinking about skin cancer. So non-melanoma skin cancer, which is the most common skin cancer, is on your face, top of your hands. So I always tell people to always protect your face and the top of your hands from excessive sun exposure because you can be at increased risk. But non-melanoma skin cancer is easy to detect and easy to treat. Melanoma, on the other hand, of course, is deadly. But most melanomas occur on the least sun-exposed areas. Occupational sun exposure decreases your risk for malignant melanoma.
Yeah, okay. That is, I think there was a study in Sweden done over, I think, 20 years on 30,000 women that showed that that the exposure to sun decreased the risk for melanoma in these women over 20 years.
So Kennedy published in 2003 Journal of Investigative Dermatology coming to that conclusion as well.
Michael, what do you think about the corona crisis? So you're afraid? I mean, we know in general it is a virus what is could do a big harm because it's in the heart of the lung. And but do you think there's a correlation to a weak immune system and low vitamin D3? And what is your idea about the ongoing pandemic?
Right. So there are studies that have shown, one in Japan in school children that you're probably aware of, where they gave school children 1,200 units a day during the wintertime and showed it reduced their risk of developing influenza A infection by about 42%. Another study done in the United States in the Connecticut area showed adults with a blood level on average of about 38 to 40 nanograms per ml reduced their risk of upper respiratory tract infections by about 40 to 50%. So there is a lot of evidence to suggest that vitamin D plays a very critical role on your immune system in reducing risk for both bacterial and viral infections. And that includes altering cathelicidin production by the macrophages, which of course is a defensin protein that specifically causes death or destroys infectious agents like viruses. So with that information, right, there is no downside to increasing your vitamin D intake. And what people think is that vitamin D is, well, maybe it inhibits immunoglobulin synthesis, so therefore it has a negative effect, or it alters a particular cytokine that may be looking like it has a negative effect. But that's not what vitamin D does on your immune system. It modulates your immune system and keeps it at a level where it's maximally functioning to help protect you from infectious agents and also protecting you from autoimmune disorders.
Okay, do you believe if the whole world population would show target values of maybe 40 to 60 nanograms, we would see a big difference in the seasonal flu every year? I mean, 2 years ago, about 1 million to 1.5 million died because of the just seasonal flu. Do you think we could reduce a lot of those deaths by increasing the target value, maybe up to 50, 60 nanograms?
It's a good question, and Hope Simpson had published a paper many years ago asking the question that there's a seasonal stimulus to the flu, because at the equator, it only occurs sporadically throughout the year. But as you know, here in Boston and Switzerland, it peaks at the end of the winter, the naders at the end of the summer. And that's, of course, the peak is when your blood levels are at the lowest for 25-hydroxy-D and highest when it's at the nadir. So there is an indication that maybe vitamin D from the sun exposure is having that direct effect. But there are two other things to consider. The first is that I'm not sure if you're aware of Dr. Ralph Krause's work that we had participated in with him. He had demonstrated that when you're exposed to ultraviolet radiation, you actually make 125 dihydroxy vitamin D in your skin. And you can maintain your blood levels, and it may be that that helps in regulating your immune system. Also, when you're exposed to sunlight, you make nitric oxide, you make carbon monoxide, believe it or not, and a variety of other factors, all that modulate your immune system. So sun exposure with the role of vitamin D, but sun exposure itself may have additional health benefits to your immune system. And that's why I've always been recommending now for more than 40 years, sensible sun exposure.
So, but the general rule is to never get a sunburn, of course.
Correct. And that's why we developed that app.
Michael, last question. So, as I told you before, Professor Ganati from University of Frankfurt and I, we have started, let's say, a monitoring of, we would like to have as many thousand people as possible in this first step, and then we are starting a prospective controlled study. First, we're going to collect some, let's say, to find some correlation, and then we want to start a prospective study. So maybe you could help us with that and take part at this study and to promote our monitoring experiment.
It would be my pleasure.
Yeah, wonderful. That would be very helpful, because we think, I mean, the next winter, the next flu will be in 2021 for sure. And so we think it would be easy and affordable thing. I mean, even 10,000 units is maybe 50 cents. It's not very expensive, and especially in areas where the good thing is, maybe the people who have less money, they are mostly closer to the equator, so it's even easier. They do not even have, they do not even have to spend a lot of money for supplements. So it was so great talking to you, and maybe we could, if everything is going to normalize, we could invite you to come to our education center to Switzerland. It's a very nice place, and we would be really happy to have you here for a lecture in Switzerland.
It would be wonderful. And if you send me an email, I'll send you some of these publications we discussed, so you could put them online if you wish.
Yeah.
And also your audience can go to just drholick.com, drholick.com. And on there are presentations by me as well that they may want to listen to.
Okay, wonderful. We're going to put it into the YouTube link, and so it will be very helpful. Okay, so thank you so much, and have a nice evening, and hope to see you soon personally again. Okay, thank you. The same for you. Bye-bye. See you. So I believe this was an amazing interview, and we have received great insights. Thank you so much, Professor Holick. And I invited him to come to we are planning a congress at the beginning of November here in Kreuzlingen in Switzerland, with all the participants of the Swiss Biohealth News. I think this would be a really incredible weekend with a lot of learning and knowledge. And he agreed, so we are going to set it up, and we will see if everything works out and we are allowed to travel until then. I strongly believe, of course. I want to remind you, I bought this on Amazon. This is a so-called vaporizer, where you put the H2O2 in here, 3%, and this was recommended by Dr. Thomas Levy. And so you could use it very easily. It costs maybe $15 and $5 for the H2O2, and then you just inhale 2 or 3 times for several minutes. And I used it on my 86-year-old mother, and within 1 day the cough was gone. So it had nothing to do with COVID, of course, but she just had, because it was very cold, a cough, and it was gone. And especially for those who have to be close to patients like dentists, they could protect themselves with this easy to use tool. Okay, so that's for today. So see you tomorrow at 7 p.m., but this will be in German. At least we're going to see each other in 2 days, on Wednesday, when we're going to talk with Professor Schönfeld from Tel Aviv. Thank you so much, and have a nice evening.
Thank you and have a delightful day.